what comes next is I've called it Building Empires, and it's kind of a pun because the focus here will be on architecture. And if you're like me, you maybe are not as interested in buildings, just naturally drawn to buildings as you are to, for instance, paintings or sculptures or so on. And yes, we are going to look at some sculptures and relief sculptures and so on and so forth, but the focus will be buildings. And I have noticed that as I've begun teaching it and thinking about how these buildings fold into society and the cultures they come from, it becomes really fascinating, especially because there's a lot of problem solving that's involved. And so this is something that I wanted to focus on, especially as we think about power. Buildings end up being this massive monument to a culture's interests and, well, at least one person, whoever commissioned it's power, and then a whole bunch of people and resources that had to build it, right? So a ruler or a single person can't just be like, I guess I'll create the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. Doesn't work, right? So because it's a group project, it sometimes says something, or oftentimes says something about the values of that culture. So for instance, the pyramids that we were looking at, right? So much human power and resources go into that. Why would they stand for it? And it's very connected to what's important to them. So, all right, so what we're going to be doing is focusing, we're going to kick it off with Rome. We're going to be looking at two dome-like structures, one in Rome, the Pantheon, and the incredible technology that was involved in creating it. And I bet you that there are several of you who have been there. And if you have any pictures of you in the Pantheon, will you send it to me? And if you're willing to let me share it, because I want to put it in the PowerPoint. So if you have any, email them to me. I'm dying to see them. I think it'd be so fun. Okay, and then the other one is the Hagia Sophia, this gorgeous building that has been in the news a lot. And we're not going to be talking as much about the news kinds of things. We're going to be talking about it in its creation, but also these sort of dome structures. Human beings seem to be very interested in domes. I mean, all the way back to the Mammoth Bone House, right? So we've got this gorgeousness, and I've even found a soundtrack for the way that scientists have figured out the way that the audio would have sounded in this building. It's fascinating. Can't wait to share it. All right. Then the next thing we're going to be looking at is the way we're going to be looking at the medieval period is looking at these sort of portals to cathedrals and the storytelling that goes on during that time. So here we'll get to see some figures, right? And these biblical stories are sort of fascinatingly interpreted in this period. And I'm hopefully going to connect it back to other ways in which we're going to portray, for instance, Christ. So there are other options for portraying Christ in art history. Interesting that they chose this one, right? And so we're going to see some consistency there. And then the last culture, which is going to be, this is a real learning curve and part of my commitment to really learning about and teaching cultures, specifically African and African-American cultures, really getting to know it. So I'm really going to be immersing myself in as much as I can about this, not being a specialist, but a good generalist. And this is around this incredible architecture of the Great Enclosure in Zimbabwe and the culture of Great Zimbabwe, okay? And so just some of the reading I've already done, it's gorgeous. I mean, just so beautiful, a construction. What we're gonna be doing is thinking about why these monuments, these objects, at that time in these cultures, okay? Really interesting way to approach, I think, power, okay? So here we go, just the heads up again, same amount, right? 4 lectures, it's all the month of October. We're gonna use a new Zoom. These are some of the possibilities of the things that we're gonna look at. Some of them might change because I like to tell a good story, and so it just depends. Sometimes I'm stringing things together and I knock some things out and add some other things.